So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Josh Mitchell. I am the new head of sales at Cypro and representing TRM. So we're excited to bring you the first, actually, in a series of webinars. Today's is around supporting your growing academy trust. So as you can see today, we're joined by Red Kite Learning Trust based in Yorkshire. So Red Kite Learning Trust that was originally formed by 3 starter schools working together at both head and governor level to create the growing map they are today. One of Red Kite's aims was to deliver a centralised back office function so that the schools have the support, but also so that standards can be set across the trust. Something obviously our TRM tool marries nicely with. So today we're joined by Red Kite CEO Richard Sheriff and their CFO Steve Howell, who have been instrumental actually in TRM's development, sharing the knowledge and helping us create an estates tool that is fit. Perfect.
Looks like I'm on now, Will.
Perfect fit for the sector.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.
Yes,
okay, so Jesse, if you have any more questions, just let me know.
I don't know what's happened there. Just bear with me a second.
Right, okay, cheers. Thanks, Will. Bye.
Okay, I don't know what happened there, but anyway, we'll carry on. So as I say, we've got Steve and Richard. So they've been instrumental in the development of TRM. So today we'll be discussing best practice on managing a large and expanding group of estates and facilities, discussing challenges that they might have overcome and different methods they have implemented across the trust, and also what the future looks like for the trust and its estates. So the plan today is I've got a couple of questions that I'll throw in towards the end that we believe are quite topical. But if you do have any other questions, you'll see there's a chat function, a Q&A function. And if there is time at the end, we will ask Richard and Steve to answer them for us. If not, we will get back to all questions and responses or respond to them over the next couple of days. So yeah, without further ado, over to you both. Steve, Richard, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and yeah, go from there.
Thanks very much, Josh. Hopefully my screen is about to share, and hello to everybody. It's really good to see that there's a number of delegates, some of whom I've met before and others who are new. But hopefully this is a kind of twilight slot. We can be quite informal because we're relatively small in number. I'm going to briefly introduce our trust. I mean, Josh has already said a little, but we're quite a large trust now. I like, as an accountant, to just rank and see where we fit in the national context. And we're just in the top 60 in terms of MAT size. That's the top 5% of MATs. With 8,000 children, something over 1,200 staff now. Budget now is about 50 million, and as well as looking after the schools, we have a really important strand to our work, which is the teaching school hub, which is a very exciting part of our work. We're spread between Leeds and Harrogate. We have, as many of you will have, a really mixed estate, both in terms of the pupils that occupy it, in terms of the deprivation levels, but also the state of the buildings, as you can imagine. We grew quite quickly, so we had what I call a game changer moment in 2018, when we more or less doubled in size from 6 schools to 13. And that meant we had to respond quickly to that increased size, and all of a sudden, the estate, which hitherto had been sort of within 5 minutes drive of our central trust office, began to be more spread out, and we had to get to know our estate. So I think at that point, hand over to Richard, who will just explain something of that growth. If he will turn himself off mute, which is always a good thing.
Try not to make any noise in the background to disturb your oratory, Steve. My apologies. Yeah, it's very good to see you this afternoon. I hope you're well. And well, I wish I could see all of you in person, but this will have to do for now. Yeah, so it's been quite a journey, a roller coaster journey, as they say. And we refer to this as kind of riding the capacity wave. And it's important you don't get enveloped by that wave and you manage to just about ride it. But sometimes you do feel you're teetering on the top of a very powerful and very large wave. It could come crashing down at any moment. So what you're trying to do is balance growth against capacity, because we know capacity is expensive, but you only get payment through growth. So, you know, constantly as we grew as a trust, we were thinking, what's the next point we dare to make that will help us build our capacity so we can grow safely? And key appointments for us were when we expanded with an extra 7 schools all at once, we clearly needed more capacity. So you can see the smiling Scouser himself, Dave Noble, was brought on in 2015, and he'd worked for the as a kind of business manager for the small trust that we encompassed, taken on board within our larger trust, and therefore he had a really good experience and knowledge of the new partners. And he came from a commercial background. Interestingly, there's a common denominator between him and Steve. They've both worked in fizzy drinks. So he was ex-Britvic a long time ago, worked in school business management as well for some years. But he brought in considerable experience in terms of comms, change management, customer relationships, all that interaction between us as a trust and our customers, the schools themselves, our partners. So that was a key moment for us. Without that investment at that point, we would have definitely struggled. Along the journey, we've picked up sort of direct relevance to estates. So, you know, we then had Angelica, Anne is our procurement expert, and she works for us part-time, and her costs are covered by the money she saves through her procurement work. And she works right across the trust, looking at everything from paper to buildings. How do we procure effectively to give best value for schools? We were only able to have that as we grew that little bit further. And then you can say a seminal moment when 2 people arrived roughly the same time, around 2018 to 19. One was on our school improvement side. We had 9 primary schools. I'm background as a secondary trained geography teacher. No laughing, please. Yeah, I did have a beige Volvo and elbow pads at one time. But we brought in Amanda, who's our Director of Primary Education, to help me with that job, managing quality standards and all the rest of it with primaries. But more interesting to you in terms of estates, we brought in Sam. And you can see Sam there standing in front of a picture of all our schools. We said, go out and take pictures of all our schools so you know where they are. And we have them in front of us and remind us who we serve. And that's how we see things in our trust. We serve the schools. Sam is a qualified QS, had worked for one of the organisations that we'd used actually in that function. And we actually, not poached, but attracted her to work with us. And she is our estates manager. And she was, at that time, line managed directly, as she is now, by Dave, Director of Operations, and obviously working overall with Steve as our CFO. That got us to a really good place. Suddenly having those 2 people on, we were able to start squeezing value from being together. Up to that point, we felt being together had created many more challenges than we're able to meet. And then since then, we've had the dynamic arrival of a chartered accountant and so forth. But Steve has moved me on. So very quickly, we had to grasp the complexities. We decided we wanted to centralise certain things. We didn't want head teachers. I didn't want head teachers worrying about stuff. So how can we make that easier? There's no point ever doing their own thing. We will have some centralised bits of what we do, but we'll allow schools to still have autonomy about the kind of style of education they deliver, as long as it is high quality and serves every child. So we talk about 4 pillars, and one of those pillars was Arbor, changing it to a single MIS away from the kind of different ones that were there. To support that, we brought in an education transformation project, using Dell as a partner there, to be able to bring in a solid, robust network that we knew was going to be secure and vital to our success in communications and running all these systems. So Arbor, our network, and then we have Core HR. Core HR, you're obviously running our payroll and HR system, fundamentally important. And then the final part of our trust is TRM, Total Risk Manager. This was vital to us in solving problems for head teachers. Us trying to keep paperwork up to date across 13 institutions with varying levels of both ability and capacity was really hard. We needed to have a system that would give us a top level of assurance that those checks that were going on were happening, that we had a really clear view of our estates for planned maintenance, other work being done to the schools. And TRM gave us that opportunity, gave us a window into the schools, gave it just an audit tool, a planning tool, a visibility point, and great reassurance for me as CEO and for the trustees. So that brought us in to total risk manager. And at that point, I'll hand over to Steve.
Thanks, Richard. So I think in summary, Richard just saying there that in order to manage our estates effectively, we had to firstly invest in the right people, but then secondly, get that infrastructure, both in terms of the IT, but more importantly, really the communication and the collaboration and the joined up approach to our central functions that afforded. And really, since our game changer moment in 2018 until now, that's really been our focus. But I just want to move the conversation on a little more and say, Richard mentioned Sam. Here's the same photo. You can actually see her in this one. But as I reflect on what Sam brings to our trust by way of estates management, there's three aspects to it. As a large MAT, we qualify for the school condition allocation. And I know, Josh, in a minute, you're going to ask about that. So I'll come back to that point. But the second really strand of Sam's role, I think, is what I call estates improvement. And it's really Sam working with the schools, in addition to all the capital stuff under the SCA, to really look and say, well, how can we improve the estate? How can we work with you to identify opportunities and set priorities within our limited resources? And Sam, of course, works with some of those other colleagues, and Richard mentioned our procurement manager. So aspects of how do we respond to the challenges of COVID cleaning? How do we do grounds maintenance better? How do we accelerate our spend to save initiatives? All of those things, Sam is as estates manager at the very heart. So for example, on the spend to save, we're really pleased to be putting in a combined heat and power unit at one of our secondaries that happens to have hydrotherapy pool this summer. And that's just one example of improvements across the estate that we're gradually managing to put in. Sam, of course, manages relationships with a number of third parties, and she will be bringing in consultants and specialists like our architects and also our health and safety consultants. And I think if anything, the bigger that we've got as a MAT, the more we're looking to outside expertise to keep us right, keep us safe, keep us compliant. But it's also really important that Sam works to deepen the collaboration between the site managers. So in our case, we have 13 schools, 13 site leads, if you like. And Sam, as estates manager, is playing a real coordinating role to help us get the best from that disparate team. In fact, one of that disparate team we've now brought into the centre on a part-time basis. So Andy, who's one of our lead site managers, is now doing central, or will from September do central functions, and TRM is very much at the heart of that. So what we're trying to do is build into, give Sam that little bit more capacity by bringing a site manager part-time into the centre. So there's an estates improvement strand, but finally, that of course, the big statutory compliance strand, as Richard has touched on, you know, we try and listen to our external advisors on that, whether it's our internal auditor or a health and safety consultant. And actually, we're using TRM to coordinate our response to all those bits of information that come in. As Richard said, we use it for planned and reactive maintenance, but also for compliance checks. And what it does for us is it brings us increased visibility. So it brings Sam at the centre, that real instant dashboard, so she can see which of our schools are perhaps lagging behind, where are schools that haven't got up to date with the latest asbestos compliance or the Legionella water inspections. She spent time to date getting all those tasks set up on the software, and it leads us to better reporting, a better link to our trustees, who are fundamentally, you know, so important to everything that we do, that the trustees keep an oversight and keep us right. but the reporting helps us to manage by exception. So we can see at a glance where we need to focus attention, where Sam needs to be chasing and chivying. And then the final point I make is around the accidents and incidents, another TRM module. We're quite advancing, I would say, in our use of that module. And it's been really interesting looking in from the outside to see that when we get the software being used across the estate, what starts to happen is we begin to identify slightly different approaches at some of the schools to others. And so what it's leading to is a kind of a moderation, and it allows Sam to work on consistency. So I'm told that certain schools were reporting accidents and incidents in a different way, but it gives Sam that central visibility that enables us to moderate, be consistent across the piece. I think as we come towards the end of this part of the session, Richard, back to you for what the future looks like for our trust, and particularly in relation to estates.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. We hope to grow further as a trust. And as we grow further, the estate's challenge becomes greater. But what we can be is confident we now have the systems in place that are scalable so we can plug in an additional school. Now that makes it far simpler than it actually is. But in terms of, TRM, core HR, and the other systems we've got, we believe that this is going to make it much easier for us to be able to expand safely. I hope, the question I ask Sam to ask head teachers who goes to school is, tell us how I can help you make the school brilliant. That's the question we ask our schools. We serve our schools, and by having strong systems in place, we feel we can do that better. We know that the Academy's handbook, dropping of the financial, encompasses a whole lot more in terms of accountability. It makes specific reference now to obviously health and safety requirements, for example. So we knew that we needed to have something that could reassure me as the Chief Executive and Accounting Officer and our trustees that were absolutely on top of those requirements in what is, in a legislative, very, very well monitored area, and also in terms of reputational risk, a huge risk to everybody involved. So we look forward to working with the team at TRM to make sure we build that system and operate that system in a way that will give us those reassurance, allow us to grow safely, and most importantly, to keep our children and staff safe. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Josh. Back to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Steve. I think that was really well covered and really interesting, some of the points you made there. I would again encourage any questions to be asked around this stage, and we'll try and cover them after we've asked a couple ourselves. So just to kick things off, I guess, in reference to estates management, what do you think you've learned from COVID, and how does this shape your estates agenda going forward?
If I pick that one up first, Steve, is that okay? I think we've learned a great deal. I think, just writing in the newsletter to staff today, I think we've learned that we are stronger together. So I felt so sorry for schools. I'm, head teachers I know really well who are handling this all themselves. But a lot of actually getting schools ready to operate, to set up testing at secondary, to be able to make sure all the procedures are in place for keeping children and staff safe during the pandemic, have been set up by estates people on site in schools. For our schools, they were able to rely on the expertise of Sam back at base to be able to work, constantly be looking at the changing guidance that was coming through from the department, and be able to keep estates managers in the schools and site managers up to date. And she was also able to share this job with the director, the operation director, to actually go around the schools to inspect that those things were actually in place, to actually walk the schools. And these were not new sites. She knew the sites intimately. She could offer advice and support and reassurance to schools. So it really allowed schools to see the value of working together, to see the value of the estates function, not just being about capital projects or mending leaky boilers, but a more holistic view, about the building as as somewhere that keeps us all safe and where we need to be safe within. And yeah, it definitely proved its worth. It would have been a much harder 18 months without Sam and that focus on estates.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so secondly, has flexible working changed and how you manage your teams there, and how can you see this affecting the future of estates management?
Do you want to pick that, Steve? Yeah, I think we have embraced flexible working. Steve is still in that small room somewhere in the town, we don't know where, and we occasionally see sight of him, and that's the same with all our teams actually. And that we've gone for a very flexible approach. The job needs to get done, so we're currently working on an agile labour policy that can go out to our staff that will allow them, hopefully within limits, to work in the best interest of the company, but also to be able to embrace that flexible work. And that would extend to our sites team, very much so. And if we can, one of the things we're trying to do also is promote equality and diversity across our trust. So it might be that we attract other people, more diverse backgrounds, if we are to make, that agile working more possible for them and that flexible working. So we would always look at that. We see that as being relevant to estates teams and site managers and site superintendents as it is to anybody else working within the school system. Really important.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I think just almost paradoxically, despite COVID, we've probably communicated better in some ways as a team. And by team, I include, not just the the internal site teams and the other teams, the head teachers, but also the governors and the trustees. And so I think almost paradoxically, people have got a better idea of the agendas and the stresses and the strains and the challenges that the trust face. So we've been quick to communicate about our estates plan and quick to communicate about changes to that plan that have arisen because of the general pressures of COVID. I don't know if Richard agrees, but we have, through the technology, as we're doing here, communicated in an agile way. Been good, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's helped us build a consensus and feeling of belonging across the trust, because the bit that I was very knew where we could fall out very quickly is over money, isn't it? That's where and we definitely didn't want to do that. And money for stuff at school, so for building projects or repairs and so forth. So how do we balance off somebody who would really love that new extension and somebody who's got a leaky roof? How do we make decisions around that? And actually, they're quite hard. People have to sacrifice in order for somebody else to gain. There's a finite pot of money. And I think as we got to know each other better and appreciated the challenges all the schools face and started to share that, people were then more happy to say, look, I get that. I understand why school X is finding difficulty. They should get it before me. Quite understand. I'll wait for a year or 2 years on our capital plan. What was great, though, is there was a plan, a really detailed plan. And you could always ask Sam, and head teachers could, and say, look, tell me why. What's happening there? Why can't I have this here? Or why does this mean? And she would work with the head teacher so they could understand why we're working and be influenced by their views, very much so.
My plan, Richard and Josh, at that point, because I know Josh is going to ask me, just to show you the plan, if you'd like to see that.
Yes, possibly, please.
So, although this is in some ways quite a simple document, I hope it's coming up. There is a lot. There is a lot in this little document. Can you see that? What this is our school condition allocation plan. And I'll just make a couple of comments, really. The first thing is that it is a 3-year time horizon, but we also, on the plan, we show the projects that have already happened. And we organise it by school, so Alsthorpe is our first school here, it's in alphabetical order. But some of the features are, we've got this, what we call the source of request column, and that can be a variety of things, either things that Sam has picked up in her role as estates manager, or things that the school have raised, for example, the state of the toilets at this particular school, or things that have come to our attention around M&E, And we do engage some consultancy help to inspect our M&E aspects. And then there might be other sources of information such as DFE reports there, or some specific survey work that we have had done. And so what we do is we set the agenda for the 3-year time period ahead, but we're careful to use consultation with head teachers and through the heads, ultimately the local governing bodies, in order to shape up that list of priorities. But what we don't do, as I know some trusts do, is there's no formula here. So we're looking at prioritising, and we have found that the DFE mantra of safe, warm and dry, which I remember from my time doing, those of you doing SIF bids will remember that, safe, warm, dry, and we try and use those priorities. But then, of course, there are other things like the whole school improvement agenda. How do we help make a school even better by channeling some of this scarce resource? Some schools, I'll just quickly scroll down. Some schools don't get very much by way of a share. Temporal Learning Academy is a free school, and they've had very little because they don't need very much. But it's part of our trust values, really, that mean there's not a jealousy there that they haven't had a share. They might get resources in other ways, not just capital. But other schools have a disproportionate share, if you like, and that's because sometimes, as you well know, when the roof is in such a state that parents are tripping over buckets on rainy parents' evenings, those things have to be prioritised. So we do work with our head teachers and we work with our board of trustees to prioritise this. It's interesting I don't mind showing you the bottom line. Just a couple of quick features here. One thing we decided to do is take the salary costs of the estates manager from the SCA pot, and we had clearance from our auditors to do that. And another thing that we implemented was down here, this reimbursement line, if you can see that. This is where we asked the schools to put a little bit back into the SCA pot. So if they have a project with a value of 100,000, we ask them just to put 5,000 back into the pot, because that just helps us to eke out a little bit our scarce SCA funds. And if it's a spend to save project, like the combined heat and power project that I mentioned, we ask them to put a bit more. We ask them to put 10% in year 1, and then a further 10% in year 2, further 10% in year 3. And again, that just helps us to build a bit of a fighting fund around those projects like LED light replacement, for example. And it helps us just to eke out the pot, but also recognises that by nature, spend to save projects do bring a revenue saving for the school. And usually for a finance lead, I've encouraged Sam to be bold in her spending plans, and I encourage her to try and spend ahead within reason. She's not actually managed to do that so far, and COVID is partly the reason for that. But if you look at the middle column there, I've given Sam the latitude to spend ahead a little in the coming summer, recognising, if I'm really honest, that actually sometimes spending money can be difficult and there can be delays and projects can slip a little. So I want Sam to keep momentum, keep these projects going that keep the schools safe, keep them warm, keep them dry and keep them improving. But we do find overall that this is a method of managing our capital spend that has evolved but is serving us well. And we value that whole thing about being really open and really transparent with our stakeholders.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that does answer my my question around funding, how you allocate that, so that's helpful. Again, I open up any additional questions. I do have a couple more whilst we whilst we wait, if that's okay. So it's just really about the prioritising around jobs and how you do that, and those that need completing first, and how that's then communicated centrally on what sites are, I guess, non-compliant and others that are falling behind on general tasks that need completing.
Yeah, shall I start, Richard? So we distinguish the jobs, as you put it, Josh, between the capital jobs, which I've described, and we've got a clear way of prioritising those. Sometimes, as I've mentioned, we have to rephase, and schools have been good, actually. We've had, like many schools and trusts, we found that the last year has been quite challenging financially. So we've just eased off the capital accelerator just in the short term, so we can protect our reserves. But so that's on the capital side. But on the rest of it, as I say, Sam is using the TRM tool to really get all the jobs listed. And so she's got that overview, and then based on those sort of risk scoring, she will manage, working closely with the teams of site leads, the managers there, just the prioritization of those jobs.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, and I guess as we hopefully emerge into the post-COVID era, what tips, best practice do you have for estate management? I know we've covered probably most of that within the presentation, but are there any sort of additional tips you have that you think?
I think the only thing I would say is that if you have expertise, there's, you can buy in the expertise of QS or wherever you want, but we found having Sam alongside has improved our efficiency overall, because there's a question just come up in the bar actually about, do we find schools reluctant to put their own cash into projects if they're just small projects, flooring replacements? And we definitely don't find that's the case. What we are doing, though, is increasingly thinking about pushing down and down the lower level, lower and lower, about which schools just get on with building stuff. Because we're finding that what schools will do is spend 2 lots of $5,000, to get under the threshold to report and go through the trust, for example. But some of the decisions they make without, I'll give you an example. Good example. One of the schools decided they'd really like to have an area that had been used as a building site, bulldozed over, made level, and a lovely garden put in place. They said this was for them. They were going to get the money from their PTA to do it with, but they would manage it internally with their site manager. There's no need for the trust to get involved. And at a certain point, it was a very successful school, beautiful site, fine, it's your money, carry on with it. Well, it's turned into a bit of a mess in that their relationship with the contractor was too familial. They didn't get plans in front, they had no drainage plan. And what they got in the end wasn't what they thought they were going to get. And the head teacher's really disappointed. And he's reflected on that and said, before even a small project like this, which is a few tens of thousands, we would go through central team first, because we could have made better use of it. So I think having, not we're going to be the arbiters and saying what you should do. Our questions to head teachers is always, how do we help you make the school better? So tell us about what you're planning, and we can say at that point, right, well, just fund that yourself. That's not for us to do, that's your general maintenance. But if you've got a significant project, then let us know, because we might be able to help you get value for it, either through our procurement framework or through managing that project with you, or by suggesting alternative uses of that cash, which have a greater impact and have greater benefits for the young people we serve. And I think, you can't go away from it. I want to make sure schools are as autonomous as they can be, but that oversight, even at kind of flooring. I mean, for example, the flooring question is an interesting one, because, if you're buying flooring, every school's buying a little bit of flooring, it adds up quite quickly, those bills. Now, if you've got a procurement person like we have, like Anne, we'd say to Anne, right, we've got a number of schools that have got flooring. Look at where we can get that better by putting those 3 or 4 purchases together and get better value overall. So I think that centralisation estates thing is a positive thing. There aren't that many downsides. You just have to treat people well and give site managers themselves pride in the place that they work in. But I think they do that by having access to great resources, great expertise, and being guided in their work.
I think I'd just add, Josh, for me, it's a continuing sort of iteration, evolution of this. So I'm just thinking back, we pushed Sam through the NEBOSH qualification, which supplemented her, professional skills as a former QS, but added to her and broadened her experience. And I said earlier in the webinar that we've, on the primary school side, we've brought in, a colleague who's going to spend some time at the centre. So we're bolstering capacity. We're having to do it cleverly, really, because of the limited financial resource. We want to keep the central overhead as low as possible. But that's why on procurement, Richard says we are putting a real emphasis on that. We use Pagabo for much of our construction-related procurement, but we also invest in, trying to streamline procurement across the estates. So we have a common approach to grounds maintenance now. We're looking next at cleaning. One of our site managers has said they're happy to take a lead on waste management on behalf of the other schools, because we've got a real hodgepodge of waste management suppliers. So we're always trying to chip away and improve. It's a big agenda, isn't it? It feels a lot to do, and we see it as an ongoing journey.
Going to get to were those fans of the Sopranos be worried if Tony Soprano is in charge of our waste management. I can assure you isn't, but it's a character not unlike Tony, I have to say. About waste management. I think the other thing is we do have we've experimented up and down with this site services team. So we have a plumber, electrician, a couple of electricians recently, and a joiner, and we've used those across the trust, and we've found it's really complex actually trying to make that wash its face, as Steve might say, effectively. There's real pluses in having your own, particularly your own contractors at the moment, because it's so difficult to get hold of plumbers, electricians, and so on. So it's a real boon. So in terms of reactive maintenance, really, really good news, and they know the site. They've been checked, safeguarding is good, relationship. They know the way. They don't need half a day to show them around where the job is. They go straight to it, and they're trusted to go on and do stuff. Really good. So if you can, I think this, and we've kind of gone up and down this, but I think we think that for reactive maintenance uses, having that team based at one of the schools to be able to do that work is really good. What we're doing though is supplementing them with obviously our contractor list or the framework through Pagabo to make sure when we've got bigger jobs to do, we might say actually that's at a time when there is capacity in the trades that we've got, we'll have to do it, but we can go outside as well. So it's combining those two things in an efficient way. But I know that, a number of years ago now, we were constantly getting, as I refer to it, as a white van man turning up at schools, doing a bit, putting a big, call out fee in there, charging up against the school, schools losing track really, and not really knowing how to question how much is being charged. And I think that's that combination of really good trusted partners and also our own provision is quite a nice blended way of dealing with what schools need on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's another question come through from Sean there. Are you trade operatives in addition to your site manager and site supers?
Yes, they are, and that's why their income and needs to be carefully monitored. So the amount of work they do beyond their own school, the trust, needs to be measured. Each year we've looked at that and said, does that still pay for itself? Would it best just going out to subcontractors? So that needs careful management to make sure that works well. But I think on balance, and this is one of the things that when we looked at it recently, a head teacher was saying, oh, well, I think I'm paying too much because we've got these, basically paying for these guys who are on the books, and I don't see that much plumbing being done. And we kind of went back through and said, do you know how much that job there, would you asked for done by the end of the day, would have cost you if we'd gone out? If you looked at the call-out costs, if you looked at the inflation that's being applied towards, the trades at the moment, I think you'll find that's actually not a bad deal. And we looked at it, and actually, yes, some people have got a very distorted view of how much it costs to repair something in a school. And when we put that right, I think having the trades, was a good investment. So yes, they are additional to the site managers. In fact, we refer to the site, people who work on site as site custodians, something I picked from a school I visited over in Lincolnshire, the idea of custodians who really worry about the school. They look after both the site, actually the children as well at break and lunchtime. So they pick the litter, they put things out, they really care, they know the community. And then we have our tradespeople who are focused on doing a job in the school. But they still have good relationships, but they're quite different. So custodians and trades, two different parts of the same species.
Great, thank you. Yeah, can I encourage any more questions to be asked? If there's anyone else got any additional questions? I mean, if not, I think, yeah, thank you, everyone for attending. Thanks, Sean, for your questions as well. I think Steve, Richard, really insightful, really helpful. Some of the information you shared today, and I know some of our customers that are on this will really found that useful. So thank you very much for that. And yes, I think that's it from myself. Thank you all again for attending. What we will do, as I said, this has been recorded. So if there are any additional questions that come up, if you require the recording, please get in touch. I know our team may want to follow up anyway, just to see if you do have anything additional to ask. But yeah, if that's it, thank you again, guys, and
Thank you.
speak soon.
Goodbye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.